Welcome to the Filmcast review of Knock at the Cabin, the newest film by M. Night Shyamalan. I'm going to read the plot summary from IMDb. While vacationing, a girl and her parents are taken hostage by armed strangers who demand that the family make a choice to avert the apocalypse. End quote. Devindra Hardawar, we are obviously big fans of the M. Night here on the podcast.
It's complicated. I feel like it is the feeling. Of all the directors we talk about, like I have the most complex feelings towards him. Yeah.
He is in the process of, in my opinion, completing one of the greatest comebacks in director history.
Sure.
Right? This is a guy who made a trio of movies that were so terribly received that they threatened to kill his career entirely.
Yeah.
After
being one of the biggest,
after being one of the biggest, like the next coming of Steven Spielberg kind of thing. You know, Lady in the Water, The Happening, and The Last Airbender. Right? Those three movies, it was questionable whether he would make another movie after that. He did direct After Earth as well, but that also didn't go
quote unquote direct. Yes.
Yeah. So then he started self-financing his own movies. He's like, I'm putting up my own money. He made The Visit, Split, Glass, Old. Every single one of those movies I just named was a financial success.
It cost very little.
And it cost relatively little. Bringing us today to Knock at the Cabin, which is based off of the book Cabin at the End of the World. So,
better title in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah.
So with all that being said, Devindra Hardawar, what did you think of Knock at the Cabin?
I think this movie is mostly great. And I think it is a wonderful return of like M. Night at his full powers. You know, like there's this movie basically centers around a home invasion. And I was thinking like a lot of his films actually involve that. And he has been very good at producing those things and making us feel terrified by them. So I'm thinking of Signs, and this movie actually has a lot in common with Signs, honestly. Thematically seems like a sequel to it, but also Unbreakable, that like horrific the guy who breaks into the house and takes over the family thing. So this movie is just really well made. I like so much about it. My main thing is that I don't feel like it amounts to much. I feel like it builds up a lot. I feel like we're introduced to all these characters. And it ends at the point where it's like, okay, we're doing this. That's interesting. And then I don't feel like there's any real symbolic meaning to it. Like it just feels very matter of fact and very, very blunt and very, I don't know. If it just feels very like on the nose about what it's trying to say. And I would like more mystery there for a guy who has basically, been so good at creating mystery thrillers for us. I think Old, I really enjoyed that movie. Like, despite the problems I had around the ending and other issues with that thing, the experience of watching Old and seeing his craft at work was exhilarating. And I had a lot of that here too. I just feel like by the end, I'm like, I was waiting for something a little more, something a little that didn't feel as much like Deus Ex Machina type stuff. But we will talk about that in spoilers. I think overall, though, like this is a successful movie. It's worth seeing in theaters. And once again, Dave Bautista proves he's the best wrestler turned actor.
Okay. Sorry, Hulk Hogan.
Sorry, Hulk Hogan. Sorry, Kevin Nash.
Sorry, Macho Man Randy Savage.
Nobody else. We won't be talking about anybody else. Sorry, Andre the Giant. Yeah.
Wow. Oh, don't go at Andre like that.
That one's sad. Jeff Kanata, your thoughts on Knock at the Cabin?
Well, Dave, I guess you could say my thoughts about Knock at the Cabin are best summed up in the form of a limerick.
Do tell.
M. Night is supreme at suspense. His direction makes every scene tense. But my assessment depends on how it all ends. And in this case, I'm still on the fence. I agree almost 100% with what Devindra said. I think this is a really incredible movie that just sort of fizzles out at the end. Just sort of lands there. That was that? Why did we go through that exactly?
Yeah. Yeah. What does it all mean?
What is it all? Is it really? It's just okay. All right. That's all.
I guess I looked around at the audience like, I guess we all go home now.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. And it's such a bummer because it's an incredible experience. It's harrowing. It is taut. It is intense. It is an amazing virtuoso class in creating suspense, creating moment to moment. Oh my God, what would I do? Oh my God, and doing it in unlikely ways, right? People who are extremely polite. I love I love how this movie unfolds, and you keep going, oh my gosh, wow, what's it all gonna mean? What's gonna happen? And then you get to the end, and for me, it was, oh, okay. I mean, the movie is very short, very brisk. It almost could be a play. It is very contained, and it really does a lot with a little. But then it sort of amounts to only a little as well, instead of a lot, which was what I was hoping for.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a bummer. It's a bummer because I was kept waiting for something more interesting to amount from all of the internal intensity that I was feeling, all of the stuff that I went through. I went through something in this movie. It's not easy. It's a hard movie, especially if somebody who has kids and like
it's a big child in peril movie. And
yes,
that's rough. Yeah,
and I kept going. Oh, I'm in it. I'm doing this. I'm not resisting this. I'm on the edge of my seat. But by the end, I go, that's really all it was for.
Yeah. Slightly different reaction, but very similar to what you guys felt. I think that when it comes to creating suspense, M. Night still shows he's one of the best. Like, in terms of understanding where to put the camera, how to position figures on the screen, how to create iconic imagery, how to edit, how to like cut the sequence and pacing of cuts to make it so you're like, oh my gosh, I'm on the edge of my seat.
Mm-hmm.
He knows when to hold the camera there. He knows when to like make a rapid cut. I mentioned iconic imagery. There's at one point there's like a white hood that comes into play at some point in ways that I'm not going to explain how, but I'm just like, that's like an iconic image. That's like a very visually striking image. Very simple. Very simple. You don't need like a lot of, and I don't know if that was in the book, but like whatever the case is, in the movie, it's really effective.
Mm-hmm. Put together with a great performance from Rupert Grint, by the way. And
Rupert Grint's amazing in this
I see
movie,
people shouting him out in this movie, like, go watch Servant. He's also wildly fun in Servant. Yeah.
So love all that. Like every scene, I'm like many scenes, I'm on the edge of my seat. I'm like I can feel my heart beating through my chest, like when watching this movie. And so as a thriller, it's like pretty successful. But I agree with you guys that the ending is extremely disappointing for a wide variety of reasons. And so we can't really talk about this movie without talking about the ending. So anything else we want to shout out before we get to spoilers?
I do want, go ahead.
Sorry, just real quick, just pick up on that point. It's not like when you talk about most M. Night endings, right? You go, oh, the ending, you have to talk about an M. Night movie's ending. It's like, well, yes, in this case, but not for the same reason.
Not quite a twist.
Perhaps. Yeah. Well, let's wait until we get to spoilers before we talk about it.
One thing I do want to mention, I think the dialogue in this movie and the way people actually speak are good. And that's something we could not always commend on M. Night movies. And he shares screenwriting credit on this movie. And I hope to see him working together more with people to kind of, I think he's better as a visual creator. I think his camera style, everything we're talking about, visuals are great. I think his words have always been kind of messy. So I would love to see him like keep collaborating with people. So to let him focus on his strengths,
I mean, while we're picking nits, I know that you're actually praising the dialogue, but I'll say that I am begging M. Night to make his news broadcasts more authentic in his movies.
Sure, yeah.
They are such a critical part of all of his movies. Like the happening. Like every single one of his movies has like newscasts in them, and most of the time they rip me out of the movie because I'm like, that doesn't look real.
Yeah. Well, sometimes Pert Hapley appears,
it's just like if you're gonna make it an important part of the movie, which it is in this case, you really need to like put in a little more work to make it feel like an actual news broadcast. And I know he's working with limited budget and he's spending his own money to make these movies, but like still, I think he could improve that part of it. Okay.
There's no verisimilitude around his news footage, basically, and that always rips us out.
Yeah. And it's particularly important in this film for reasons we'll get into momentarily. So, okay. Well, let's talk about spoilers for Knock at the Cabin starting right now. We will start by saying that the big twist of this M. Night Shyamalan movie is that there is no twist. Literally,
Yeah.
4 people come to the
Yep.
to the
Everything
cabin,
they say is true.
and
Yeah.
they say, "Hey, if you don't do this thing, the world's going to end." And everything they say is true, and that is borne out as of the end of the film, as of the end of the movie, right? So that's kind of the quote unquote big twist. Now,
Yep.
I have a lot of thoughts about the ending, but Jeff, it sounded like you had a specific angle on like why you thought this particular ending didn't quite do it for you.
Well, it's disappointing that it just happens, and you have this
Yep.
this guy who decides to make a sacrifice. The notion of, so I'm of two things. I'm of two minds. Like the notion of, what are you willing to sacrifice to save people you've never met? Are you willing to sacrifice people that you love for people that you've never met? That is a compelling idea. It's not new, it's compelling. Also, the notion of if you had to convince someone of something that sounded crazy in order to save the world, how would you go about it? That is an extremely compelling idea as well. Like, what do you do to convince someone something that sounds patently ridiculous? What do you do? Like, those two notions are great dramatic hooks. I love hanging a story on that, on either of those, but both of them together. It's amazing.
Agreed.
But we get to the end, and it's just like, oh, well, this guy decided to do it. And I mean, we literally have this ridiculous scene in the car where they hear the song come on, and both of them are just sort of like, yeah, he did it. And like, what are we supposed to take away from that? Also, there's all kinds of, I mean, it's an ending that asks more questions than it answers, which isn't always a bad thing. But in this case, I think it is a bad thing, because I felt like the movie just sidesteps a whole lot of big questions that are pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Agreed. I feel like it's maybe too pat, right? Like, well, he did the sacrifice and God's happy, and that's the end of that chapter.
Well, also,
and that's the end of that chapter.
It bothers me, this notion of like, what are we supposed to take away from this?
Yes.
Like, any god that would need this to happen is kind of a douchebag.
Yeah.
You know, like,
so yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
The idea that, like, what am I even supposed to think about the premise by the, like, if the end is like, yeah, no, every so often, very nice people need to do something awful to appease God.
Yep. I think there are interesting ways to approach this, or to even wrestle with it. I don't think this movie even does that. Like, I think you can both have the, well, looks like God is real, and what they're saying is true, and having somebody be like, well, this God sucks.
Yeah.
Like, seriously, like, just approach it that way.
Or you know, make it into a metaphor. I thought that the movie was kind of going to try to arrive at a metaphor of, you know, the sort of God works in mysterious ways notion of, you know, awful things happen to good people. And it's like, oh, is there a metaphor to be found in, you know, these awful things that have to happen to decent human beings? There's some sort of reason for it, or some sort of necessity that, so we can feel comfort. Like, I thought, oh my gosh, we're gonna get to the point where like this was all a notion that it was manifested to describe this horrible tragedy that happened to this. Like, I had to believe that my husband died for a reason, right? But no, the movie's just uninterested in all that. There is no second layer to anything. It's literally just like, no, God demands you die, so you did.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
The most charitable reading I have of the ending is this idea of, like, by having a child, you must give up a part of yourself or your personhood or your life in order to like continue, you know, passing, like, in order to continue the next generations or whatever. That I'm just taking a stab at like what I think that final confrontation between
it's an idea.
the two characters. You know,
you're doing a lot of the heavy lifting there.
Yes.
I
agree. Now I have a lot to say, so I'm gonna, Devindra, I'll give you a chance before I launch into my soliloquy here. So do you have any?
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a bunch of things to say, which is that there are interesting things to wrestle with here, and it seems sad that, you know, M. Night is just kind of unwilling to do it, which is sad for a guy who has always like wrestled with faith in his movies. Like Signs, even Unbreakable is all about what do you have faith in? What do you believe in? How does that shape your view of the world? It's weird that this movie just really seems disengaged with that. So I will say that like there you can both have this ending, but also build up these characters in the way that you feel the loss of Jonathan Groff's character, or you feel like why he decides to do what he did. This movie hinted at him being kind of a believer, like in one of those flashback scenes. They're like, yeah, you could pray. I won't make fun of you, but their characters don't seem to really have much of an identity other than it's important that this is a movie about a gay couple who has a child, and the book is about that as well. And I was trying to read into like, okay, so what does that really mean? What are you trying to say with that? And I think there's still a lot of criticisms there. Like I see people, especially in the LGBT community, who are just like, this movie seems really fucked up, that it is doing that's basically putting this family in that situation. And it seems almost inexcusable in some ways. I just wish it had more to say. Like I don't know if you guys have looked up what the book ending was like. I will
that's what I was going to talk about. So
Okay,
let me
okay. So I'll let you do
let me get into it. Let me get into
Yeah.
it. Okay, so I grew up in the Christian church, right? For the first couple decades of my life, I was in the Christian church, and I was part of it long enough to remember there being a time. This is around the time when like civil unions were starting to be a thing, and like gay marriage was not widespread at the time. But there was a collective freak out in the church about gay couples adopting children, right? That some would argue continues to this day, right? That there's a significant portion of American society and probably societies around the world, I can only speak for America, that isn't okay with gay people adopting kids. Now, what possible justification could there be for that? I just want to be clear. I personally think any act of adoption is a loving act, and I would never want to prevent anyone from adopting unless they're like placing a child in objective danger. But what possible justification could there be, right? And the answers to that question are outlandish and pretty ridiculous. It will unravel the social fabric. It will something like marriage as an institution will end. Like all these horrifying apocalyptic pronouncements. What this movie does is it takes that anxiety and puts it into the form of a horror thriller. I think that's completely fine,
Sure.
admirable, intriguing. Like it's totally a legitimate approach to this kind of thing, to take something that's like a real social anxiety and to make it into a film.
It's how a lot of horror movies work.
Exactly. And many of them are great. But we got to talk about how the book is different from the movie in order to really understand why this ending feels pretty weak, right?
And honestly, even the book one sounds pretty weak to me. So
so in the book, basically what ends up happening is the child is accidentally killed, right? And then basically everyone else also dies in the book. And Andrew and Eric, the two people, need to decide like what are they going to do? Do they still sacrifice one of themselves? And one of them says this line of dialogue, because Wen dies by accident in a struggle, and they're like, well, it's not good enough because you didn't intentionally kill Wen, so the sacrifice is not good enough. And Andrew says, quote, focus on this. They expect us to believe that Wen's death isn't a good enough sacrifice to their God. So you know what? Fuck them and their God. Fuck them all. End quote. Right? The idea being that like, if this child's death and everything that happened is not enough, is this even a God worth trying to please? Right?
A notion the movie never approaches.
Exactly. It is explicit in the book. It's like, exactly, like what kind of God would allow this to happen, right?
Or want it.
And in the book, the planes crash, all the plagues happen kind of in similar fashion, but you don't know if the world actually ends, right? So what happens is like Eric and Andrew, I think the two characters, right? They decide whatever happens next, whether the world ends or not, we're gonna be in it together, and that's the ending of the book. Like you don't know whether or not the world actually ends. You don't know if the world's saved. That's where the ending is. In the movie, very different. I understand why they didn't want Wen to die, because that would have been like horrifying for audiences.
She's too cute.
She's too cute. She's too cute. The movie has a C cinema score.
Yeah.
So a lot of people didn't like this movie. even though it's number one at the box office. In the movie, they decide that Jonathan Groff's character is going to sacrifice himself, right? And then that solves everything. The ending of the movie is, guess what? It's all solved. Millions of people died, but and you know, we are traumatized. We are traumatized for life, but everything's going to be okay.
Let's go back to church, everybody.
And
all's good.
That weakens the teeth of the movie a lot, in my opinion, because in the book, it's like, it's very much an allegory for how, if you're a gay couple that has a kid, like, what I understand from reading is that there's a lot, like, there's this feeling of like, the world is not okay with your choices.
Yep.
And the book manifests this anxiety into this horrifying situation. And in the movie, the fact that they're a gay couple is somewhat important to the plot, because one of the characters is like, I don't care if the world ends. They've treated us like shit. Like, and he probably wouldn't feel that way quite the same way if he was straight. And
he's getting over trauma.
And he's getting over trauma.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that actually worked pretty well. That notion of, you know, they're coming here to do something very specific to us because of who we are.
And I think it works from a plot perspective, but I don't think it works from a thematic perspective, because the movie doesn't land the ending, right? Like, the movie doesn't have an ending that makes you feel like, oh, like, this movie is making a statement about what it's like to be gay and have a family in this world. Like,
well, there's also all this.
The fact that they're gay is like largely incidental, and even the visitors are like, we didn't know you would be gay. Like, you know, this was random, right? Like,
there's all this stuff about the first guy to die, maybe being the person who assaulted him.
He definitely was.
Correct.
Well, it goes back and forth, but it doesn't mean anything. Like, the movie completely doesn't care about, which I think is a very interesting notion, is like the idea that the person who is least suited for this job of convincing you to do this is the person that was chosen to do that. That is fascinating. But the movie just doesn't.
Well, the movie uses it as, hey, maybe it's like a point of suspicion. Like, maybe they're actually here to just terrorize us. They're not, like, they're not here to actually do this mission, right?
Which was interesting. But the once you know the truth, it's like the idea of, okay, God is putting this person, like the person who has been the source of your fears and the reason you own a gun, the reason you learn to box. You know, the conclusion is he was able to box out the guy who assaulted him, and they never really fully explore that. And that coincidence seems like kind of something that could have been explored.
Instead of it is, that's what it is. At the end of the day, it's just a coincidence. It's not like and it's a way to be like, oh, I'm suspicious of these people, as opposed to like, wow, this is really deeply upsetting part of why God did it.
God is doing it for a reason of being like, listen, this person is trying to prevent the world, but they're also the person who's done the most harm to you in your life. You know, will you ever trust them? One thing I will say is, like, if this ending could have worked if they had set it up better. Like, if they had set up why Jonathan Groff feels the way he does, if they had set up the struggle of like what God is actually doing, just asking those questions, I think, would make it more interesting. The other thing is that I do feel like the invaders, the four horsemen, which, by the way, this is a really interesting way to convey the horsemen of the apocalypse, right? Like, as aspects of humanity, rather than like, was it war, famine, the usual
pestilence?
Yeah. Once you see that tidal wave, you know, on the Pacific Northwest, R.I.P. Dave. Sorry. You're gone. You're gone, buddy.
How did they get that footage?
How did they get that footage? Once you see that, it's like, oh, I think they may be telling the truth or something. I don't know.
Well, they do have that dialogue of like, oh, they clearly just timed it. And by the way, I don't know if you guys have been there. That's Haystack Rock. It's a very iconic rock in Portland. Again, M. Night, you know, with the live footage, like, just say like someone was live streaming it on Instagram or something. Like, have some kind of explanation for how they got the footage, you know. I would agree that like there's a lot of territory there that is unexplored, and it's a shame. And I think, you know, M. Night is a person of faith, and it's hard for me.
He was training to be a priest at one point. Like, that was a goal in his life, apparently. So yeah,
it's hard for me to view the way this movie ended up as as anything other than a watering down of kind of what the book was trying to say, you know, in terms of the ending.
Those scenes, though, by the way, like that tidal wave, like that is something I think about. Like my family thinks about, like, hey, we knew people around Seattle, like maybe we should go up there at some point. And in the back of my head, I'm like, the tidal wave's going to wipe that place out in 100 years.
There is a lot of good data that shows that sometime within the next 30 years there's going to be a catastrophic earthquake in this area. So it's something it is something I think about. We are fairly earthquake prepared in my household, but like not everyone
are
is.
you 100-foot tidal wave prepared? I don't know. I don't know about that. All the sequences, though, I just want to shout, like, the things done well, like Batista talking with Gwen early on, even that first scene.
Oh yeah,
so like
it frames
well
them
done.
Like uncomfortably close. It's so you're
it gets
too close
closer
to them,
and closer
right?
as they start to connect more. That is very weird. And also all the killings. I just want to point that out too. Like I think that's all. He's technically a master at this stuff. So when Rupert Grint puts on the mask and like prepares for it, like we're like, what is happening here? Oh, the weapons are for them. The weapons aren't for the people being imprisoned. That's horrifying, and that's the stuff M. Night is still good.
Yeah, it's amazing. Like you see some of the teaser trailer, like just like one of them standing in front of the other two, and then like it's really harrowing stuff. It's like M. Night at his best, in my opinion. I still like many things about the movie, even if I don't like the kind of ultimate message, whatever that can be said to be. You know, it's still really well made in a lot of ways.
I also love that there's no way to be kind and polite enough if what you're saying is horrible. It's like
it's true.
You just got to feel for Batista's character, because it's like, man, he's trying real hard to make this as pleasant as possible for them. You know,
he's a real nice guy. He's a second grade teacher, Dave Batista, second grade kindergarten cop.
He's like, I really hate to do this to you. You know, please, if you don't mind, just open the door. We'd love to just chat. We will knock it down if we have to. But we really, it's such an awesome take on that kind of a scene where,
right.
And I've never seen that before. It's just the super polite, super respectful, horrible thing that comes to the door.
Totally. But yeah, I mean, the movie doesn't sit well with me for a lot of ways, right? Like I've already covered how it's a movie in which this gay family is like terrorized, right? And it's like, okay, that's fine. You know, hate crime still happen in the United States. Ideally, if you're going to show that, like there's a really good justification. I don't think the movie lives up to that to start with. And then the other thing is these people like sound like they're from QAnon or some conspiracy theorists. And of course, they're the ones that are proven to be right at the end.
Yes.
And that's not quite what happens in the book. In the book, it's like a little bit more ambiguous. Like it's pretty clear that something's going on, planes crashing and all this stuff. But like it's left ambiguous as to whether the world will end. In the movie, it's unambiguous. They were 100% right. And I'm just very leery of work that like position. It's very much like our Sick review from a couple weeks ago, where like the people who in our society are like probably the worst are framed to be the good guys in the movie.
It's a little.
I don't like that. I don't like
my final question, by the way. Why is this movie rated R? Why?
All
the violence
horrific.
is like they cut away as soon as the violence. Like
it is pretty light on violence, but you do see like people's heads getting caved in, but I would agree with you. It's very tame for an R-rated movie.
I've seen far harder.
They cut away from a lot of the worst stuff. I would agree with that. Probably there's a lot of language in it, though, if I recall correctly. There's probably a lot of F words, is my guess. So maybe that's that too. And M. Night's probably, when he's self-financing these movies, like with his savings account, he's probably not like, how can I please the MPAA? You know?
Yeah.
Anyway, any other thoughts, or shall we wrap it up there, folks?
That's it.
Yeah. It's unsettling, but it's supposed to be. Yeah. But not this way.
It's unsettling in both ways.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, it is really impressive that M. Night Shyamalan made a movie. Thank you so much for watching this video of the Filmcast. Check out these other videos that we have available, and be sure to hit like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon to get other videos from us in the future.
You can also go to thefilmcast.com to catch all of our audio podcast versions of all of our episodes.
And support this podcast at patreon.com/filmpodcast, where you can sign up for ad-free episodes and exclusive After Darks.
Thanks so much to everyone who makes the Filmcast possible.